Why was she so quiet when everyone else around her was laughing? The air at Fort Camden smelled of dust and gun oil, a strange mixture of earth and metal that clung to uniforms and skin. Recruits lined up on the training range, some nervous, most pretending not to be. The drill instructor's voice boomed, his words slicing the silence into jagged pieces. Think that tiny frame of yours can hit anything. The laughter came instantly, sharp and easy, as if everyone had been waiting for the moment. Boots scuffed against the ground. Hands slapped against rifles. A couple of recruits mimed being shot, clutching their chests and staggering in exaggerated falls. The group's amusement rolled like a wave. But she didn't answer. The young woman just shifted her stance, one deliberate movement. A hand adjusted her shirt, a slight tug downward, but the fabric lifted instead. For the briefest moment, the ink surfaced. A tattoo, black and unmistakable, coiled into view. A serpent, sleek and dangerous, wrapped around a bullet. And in that second, someone behind her stopped moving. Colonel Rohr froze mid-step, his breath catching. His voice, suddenly quiet, carried none of the arrogance of the drill instructors. It was low, almost reverent. That's a black Viper Insignia. No one heard him except himself. The woman's name was Nora, 28. European-born, slender build, pale complexion. Eyes that betrayed nothing, not anger, not pride, not even pain. Just stillness, a surface without ripples. She had been on base for a week, and already she carried herself differently. She spoke less than anyone, arrived earlier than everyone, and somehow ended up cleaning rifles long after others had gone to sleep. They had nicknamed her Little Miss Shot, sometimes just the extra. It was easier to give her a label than to understand her. On the first drill, she had done something none of them expected. She refused to fire. Scared to pull the trigger, one instructor sneered. Why'd you even sign up if you're not going to shoot? Nora had lowered her gaze, her voice so soft it nearly disappeared. I've fired before, but I won't do it again unless I'm sure I should. That drew even more laughter. Soda cans, old barns, maybe video games. They pictured a girl with a pellet gun pretending. But something in her silence made their laughter thinner than it should have been. The way she disassembled rifles with precision, the way she polished each chamber until it gleamed, the way her eyes measured distance, light, wind, and movement as if she were solving an invisible equation. These weren't the habits of someone who had only toyed with weapons. She was watching, calculating, waiting. The others never noticed the way her gaze tracked the grass bending in the wind, the shimmer of heat rising off the sand, the way light bent across glass. They never noticed how her hands stilled whenever someone chambered around, her body tensing like a memory was clawing its way back. One night, Sergeant Harlan caught her alone, crouched on the floor with disassembled rifles spread around her like puzzle pieces. He frowned. "Voss, what are you doing?" She didn't look up. Her voice was a whisper. "Making sure everything's ready." Ready for what? Her eyes lifted slowly. In them, there was something that didn't belong to this moment, something that belonged to another place, another time. For the moment, someone needs them to work without fail. Harlan hesitated, his throat dry. He left without pressing further. But the others didn't stop pressing. The jokes got sharper, crueler. Maybe she's waiting for the targets to surrender. Bet she thinks this is some yoga retreat. Still, Nora said nothing. She just kept moving through her quiet routine, first to arrive, last to leave, always carrying gear that wasn't hers, always checking what others ignored. It wasn't fear that held her back. It wasn't even pride. It was something heavier, something buried so deep it carried weight without sound. And then came the day when silence wasn't an option. A live fire exercise. "Voss, you shoot first." The instructor's voice was sharp, final, a challenge meant to humiliate. "One round only, miss it and you're done here." Nora said nothing. She just walked forward, calm, steady, hands brushing the rifle barrel with a strange tenderness. The sun caught the edge of her shirt as she adjusted, and the tattoo showed again. One of the instructors spotted it. A snake coiled around a bullet, the head marked with the letters BV-12. He smirked, ready to make some crude remark about cheap ink and false bravado, until Colonel Roar stepped forward. His eyes locked on the tattoo. His face changed. "Stop it." The word came out as a whisper, but it carried weight that froze the air. "She's Black Viper." The laughter died instantly. The range went still. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. The instructors stared. A couple of recruits frowned, confused. Black Viper. The name meant nothing to them, but it meant everything to him. "That unit was shut down," one of the instructors muttered. "No survivors." "She's the one who made it." Colonel Roar's words were quiet, almost strangled. His mind spun back to years earlier, to a mission that had never officially happened, to a hill soaked in silence and blood. Red line. The operation erased from reports, the names lost to time. Black Viper. They weren't just soldiers. They were shadows. Specialists who went where no one else could go, who fought in silence and disappeared without glory. A team so precise each fighter was as lethal as a full squad. "How many were in your unit?" Roar asked softly, unable to stop himself. Nora's voice barely carried. 12. "And how many made it back?" She met his gaze, calm, steady, eyes like glass. "You're looking at her." The silence that followed pressed down on everyone, thick and suffocating. Even the flag in the distance seemed to pause in its motion. The recruits who had mocked her now shifted uncomfortably. They didn't understand everything, but they felt it. Something had shifted. The colonel's hands trembled. The instructors took an instinctive step back. "The BV-12, he whispered. "That was your team's call sign." "No." Her answer was quiet, but it cut deep. "It's the number I couldn't bring home." The words hung in the air, heavy with ghosts. Sergeant Harlan cleared his throat, desperate to break the tension. "Voss, your shot still stands." Nora nodded. No argument, no delay. She walked toward the firing line with the same unhurried pace she always carried. But this time every step felt different. Every eye followed her, not with ridicule but with something closer to fear. One of the loudest recruits spoke, his voice stripped of arrogance. "Ma'am, what was Black Viper really like?" Nora stopped, the rifle halfway to her shoulder. "Quiet," she said, her voice barely carried. "We were always very quiet." The recruits held their breath, waiting. Colonel Roar's voice cut in, sharp, angry, protective. "Stop the training. Who made her shoot first?" No one spoke. "She doesn't need this course," he said, his tone heavy. "She once saved my life. 900 meters out. I never saw her face, only knew the tattoo." Every recruit turned to Nora, the woman they had mocked, ignored, dismissed. She lifted her eyes toward Roar, her voice steady. "I didn't save you. I just did what it took to get our people out alive." The colonel raised his hand, a crisp salute delivered with trembling fingers. And for the first time since she had arrived, every recruit, every instructor stood frozen in respect. But Nora wasn't done. Because silence, no matter how deep, eventually breaks. Why did his hands tremble when he heard her voice? Colonel Roar had lived with the memory of Hill 9 for years. He had replayed it in fragments, gunfire in the dark, the metallic taste of blood, the static of a dead radio. But now, with Nora standing before him, those fragments sharpened into something he had never truly faced. Nora's gaze held him still. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pity. It was something colder, the quiet of someone who had survived what no one else had. "Colonel Roar," she said softly, "you said I saved you with a single round. That's not quite right." Every recruit's eyes were fixed on her. No one breathed. "The truth is, I fired 473 times that day." The words didn't land immediately. Some of the recruits frowned, confused. 473. No one spoke, but the silence deepened. Roar's mouth opened, but nothing came out. His memory told him he had been pinned down by a single enemy sniper, but Nora's voice began to peel that memory apart, piece by piece. Hill 9 wasn't an extraction, she said. It was an ambush. Her eyes lowered for the first time. Her hand traced the barrel of the rifle as if steadying herself against ghosts. Intel said one sniper. There were 17. The recruits stiffened. Even the most arrogant among them felt the weight in her words. 17. You were trapped for 6 hours, she continued, her voice steady but laced with something heavier. Top floor, northeast corner. A head wound above your eye. I saw you try to patch it with a torn sleeve. I saw you count your ammo 17 times, hoping each round would last longer than it could. Roar felt his legs weaken. He had never told anyone those details. No report had them. They had been his private memories until now. How do you know that? His voice cracked. Her reply was simple. Because I was watching you, from the clock tower, 873 meters away. The air felt colder, heavier. Even the recruits, who didn't know the details of Hill 9, felt the truth in her words. I kept you in my scope the entire time, Nora whispered. I saw you reach for that broken radio. I saw your hands shake when you thought no one was looking. I saw you fade, then force yourself back. And I saw every man who tried to end you. Her voice faltered, just for a heartbeat. I dropped 11 before you realized I was even there. The recruits looked at one another in disbelief. 11. 11 lives ended in silence, never even seen. The 12th had you lined up. You moved to the window, exposed. That's when I fired the round you remember. But that wasn't the first shot. It wasn't the last. It was just one of hundreds. Roar's eyes blurred. His throat tightened. He remembered the window, the sound, the sudden absence of the bullet meant for him, but he had never known what came before or after. The intel was wrong, Nora said, her voice low. It wasn't just a sniper, it was a trap. They knew when you'd arrive. They knew how you'd move. They planned for it. Black Viper was sent to clean up. That's who we were. The ones who arrived when everyone else was already gone. Her tone shifted, heavier now, pressing down on every listener. You asked what Black Viper was like. She paused, her eyes darkening. We were quiet, always quiet, because when you've buried 11 teammates in one night, laughter doesn't come back. The recruits who had mocked her now stared at the ground. Even Bishop, the loudest of them all, felt his chest tighten. Why didn't you tell anyone? He blurted, his voice trembling. Why let us believe you were nothing? Nora's head turned, her eyes meeting his. Because the moment you start believing your own myth, you're already dead. The words struck harder than any reprimand. They weren't just about her. They were about all of them. About the arrogance of thinking toughness was measured by noise, by bravado, by laughter at the expense of someone else. She stepped to the firing line. For the first time in 3 years, her movements carried intent. Her hands no longer hesitated. Colonel, she said quietly, you told them I saved you with 1 shot. That isn't true. I saved you with 473. The first 472 were practice. Only 1 mattered. The rifle cracked, the sound ripping through the air. Downrange, the target split cleanly down the center. Another shot. A second target, half hidden behind the first, shattered. A third, a barely visible silhouette at extreme distance, dropped. The range went silent. Even the echo of the shots seemed to vanish quicker than normal. In Black Viper we had a saying, Nora said, lowering the weapon. The best shots go unnoticed because nobody dies. She paused, her voice softened. But sometimes they remember. Colonel Roar's eyes glistened. The memory of Hill 9 burned brighter than ever. For years he had believed luck had carried him home. But now, standing before him, was the truth. A ghost in flesh, the only survivor of a unit that was never meant to exist. One recruit's voice broke the silence, softer than a whisper. "Ma'am, why are you here? Why training again if you don't need it?" Her answer came slowly, as if it cost her something. "Because I needed to remember why I stopped, and maybe to see if I should start again." Her words lingered. None of them fully understood, but all of them felt it. By the time the session ended, no one laughed. Not a single recruit dared. That night, long after lights out, Sergeant Harlan walked past the range and saw her again. Alone, sitting on the bench with the rifle across her lap. Her fingers traced the tattoo, the snake, the bullet, the number 12 etched into ink. He approached carefully. "Vas, you okay?" She didn't answer right away. Her gaze stayed on the dark field ahead. "Do you ever wonder," she said finally, "how many names a single trigger can carry?" Harlan didn't know how to reply. Nora's voice softened even further. "They call us snipers, marksmen, specialists, but we're not. We're just gravekeepers. Every bullet carries someone's future, someone's child, someone's last moment." Her hand stilled. For the first time, her eyes glistened under the dim light. "I thought we were heroes once. I thought Black Viper meant something. But when you're the last one standing, the word hero doesn't taste right anymore. It tastes like ashes." Harlan shifted uncomfortably. He wanted to comfort her, to say something, but he knew words would fall short. So he did the only thing he could. He sat beside her in silence. The night stretched on. Crickets sang in the distance. The faint hum of generators pulsed through the base, and the two of them sat together, saying nothing, sharing a silence that weighed more than words. What none of them knew, not the recruits, not even Roar, was that Nora had carried something else with her to Fort Camden. A small notebook, worn and battered, tucked inside her duffel. Inside were 12 names, 11 of them crossed out, one left uncrossed, her own. Every night before she slept, she opened the notebook. Her fingers traced the list, and every night she whispered an apology that no one would ever hear. That night was no different. She closed the notebook slowly, placed it back, and stared at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come easy, not for someone who remembered every breath of the dead. But tomorrow would come, and with it, questions she wasn't sure she was ready to answer. Why were the same recruits who once mocked her now whispering in hushed tones, afraid to meet her eyes? The following day, the training yard carried a different weight. The dust didn't seem to rise the same way. The laughter that usually sparked before drills never came. Recruits stood straighter, spoke less, stole glances at Nora when they thought she wouldn't notice. She did notice. She noticed everything. But she pretended not to. Pretending was easier than acknowledging their change. When she walked to the range, no one made jokes. No one called her Little Miss Shot. Instead, they stepped aside as if giving her room, though she hadn't asked for it. Respect wasn't requested. It was forced into existence by truth. Colonel Roar stood farther back that day, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He hadn't slept the night before. The memories of Hill 9 haunted him more vividly now, sharper than they had in years. He knew the recruits didn't fully understand who Nora was, but they felt it. That was enough. Sergeant Harlan ran the session as usual, though his voice carried less mockery. He called on others first, correcting form, tightening stances, making them repeat drills until sweat soaked through their uniforms. Nora remained silent, watching. Yet her silence was different now. Before, it had been the silence of dismissal, of being ignored. Now, it was the silence of gravity, a silence people leaned toward rather than away from. Halfway through the day, Bishop, the loudest recruit from before, approached her while others pretended not to watch. He shifted nervously, scratching the back of his neck. "Ma'am," he began awkwardly, "about yesterday." Nora turned, her pale eyes settling on him. Bishop swallowed. "I was wrong." The words came out stiff but real. Nora studied him for a moment. Her face gave away nothing. Then she simply nodded once and looked back at the range. Bishop waited as if hopping for something more, a smile, forgiveness, acknowledgement. But nothing came, and somehow that nothing taught him more than words ever could. Later, during a marksmanship exercise, Harlan barked corrections at a recruit named Harris. Harris's hands shook as he tried to steady his aim, the laughter from previous days replaced now by silence. No one dared mock mistakes anymore. Still, Harris trembled, his frustration building. "Relax your shoulders," Harlan ordered. "You're overthinking." But Harris couldn't. His hands betrayed him, nerves firing uncontrollably. He lowered his weapon, shame on his face. Nora stepped forward, her voice cutting through quietly. "Breathe." Harlan glanced at her but didn't stop her. Everyone listened. "Not through your chest," she said. "Through your stomach, slow. Let the rifle rise with you, don't fight it. Let it move, then settle." Harris looked at her uncertainly. "Again," she said simply. He did as instructed. His shot landed closer to center, not perfect but better. Nora nodded, again. A second shot, closer still. "Now forget the target," she murmured. "Just breathe. The bullet doesn't care about nerves. It follows the wind, trust it." The third shot struck near bullseye. Harris lowered the rifle slowly, his chest rising with steadier breaths. For the first time he smiled. Nora said nothing. She stepped back, her face unreadable as if she had done nothing at all. But the recruits saw, they felt the shift. Her silence wasn't just survival, it was teaching. That night whispers spread through the barracks. Not laughter now, but questions. Who exactly was Black Viper? What missions had they done? How had she survived when the rest hadn't? Some of the recruits searched old records, finding nothing. Black Viper didn't exist on paper. They were ghosts erased from history. The mystery only deepened their unease. And still, Nora remained the same. First to rise, last to rest. Quietly cleaning rifles that weren't hers, writing notes no one saw, sitting alone at the edge of the range as if the silence itself kept her alive. But inside she was breaking. The respect of these recruits, the weight in their stares, it brought back everything she had tried to bury. The 11 faces, the ambush, the sound of muffled voices cut short by sudden silence. And one memory above all. She saw it in dreams, replaying like an old film she couldn't burn. The last night of Black Viper. The mission had been simple on paper. Extract civilians caught between fire lines, supposedly light resistance, but paper lies. The streets had been narrow, the buildings tall, the alleys like traps carved in stone. Her unit had moved like shadows, 12 of them sweeping block by block. She remembered Bishop, not this Bishop, but her own teammate with the same call sign, joking under his breath to ease the tension. She remembered Raven humming tunelessly, her superstition before every mission. She remembered Holt tapping his helmet twice for luck. They were more than soldiers, they were family. Until the shots came. Until the air split with muzzle flashes from windows above, below, all sides at once. It wasn't a mission, it was a slaughter. Nora had moved to cover, firing, calculating, trying to keep track of them all. One by one, voices cut from the comms, screams, then silence, the worst kind of silence. By dawn, she was the only one left. She didn't remember how she made it out, just fragments, blood, smoke. The number 12 etched into her skin because she needed to carry them somehow. 11 names carved into her memory. She woke up at Fort Camden years later, still tracing the tattoo like a prayer. The next day of training, the recruits noticed something new. On the bench beside Nora's rifle lay a small notebook. Worn, edges frayed, cover nearly falling apart. When she stepped away, curiosity got the better of Harris. He leaned close, just enough to glimpse the first page. A list of names. 11 crossed out. He backed away quickly, guilt flooding him. He didn't say a word, not to anyone, but he carried the image all day, heavy as lead. During evening drills, Bishop approached her again, his voice softer this time. "Ma'am, how do we become like you?" For a moment the faintest flicker touched her face. Not quite a smile, not quite sorrow, something in between. "You don't," she said. "You become better." The words sank deep, not just for him, for everyone listening nearby. When the day ended, recruits returned to their bunks, whispering less, reflecting more. They weren't sure yet what lesson she was giving them, but they knew it wasn't about shooting. It was about something harder. That night Nora sat alone again, staring at the field. The wind shifted, carrying faint echoes. She imagined voices, her unit's laughter, their rituals, their unshakable bond. For a moment she let herself hear them. And then she reminded herself they were gone. She was the only one left. But maybe, just maybe, these recruits didn't need a legend. They needed something else. They needed someone who had already carried the silence, someone who could teach them what not to become. For the first time since arriving, Nora wondered if she had come not to remember, but to pass something on. And though she would never say it out loud, a thought formed quietly in her mind. If even one of them learns what silence costs, maybe the weight I carry won't be for nothing. What happens when silence is no longer enough? The morning sun broke across Fort Camden in pale streaks, cutting through mist that clung to the training grounds. Recruits shuffled into formation, boots scuffing the gravel, their usual chatter muted. The weight of yesterday lingered, the stories whispered, the shots they'd seen her fire, the realization that the woman they once mocked carried shadows they couldn't imagine. Colonel Rohr stood at the edge of the yard, arms folded, eyes fixed on Nora as if searching for answers in her stillness. He had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, Hill 9 replayed with sharper clarity, and every time he opened them, he found her standing in silence, living proof of the ghosts he thought buried. That morning, Sergeant Harlan announced something different. Field exercise, full day, no simulations. You'll be dropped in squads outside the perimeter and tasked to navigate back to base. Enemy markers will be active. The recruits shifted uneasily. They'd done drills before, but this sounded heavier, more like combat than training. Harlan's voice hardened. "Remember, this isn't about hitting targets. It's about discipline, about whether you can think under pressure." The squads were split, names called. Harris went with Bishop, others grouped quickly, and then came hers. "Voss, you're with Squad 3. Eyes darted, whispers rose, quickly silenced. No one wanted to be in her squad before. Now no one wanted to admit they didn't want to. 3 recruits clustered beside her, Harris, Bishop, and a quiet recruit named Vega. They avoided her gaze at first until she glanced at them, expression unreadable. "We'll move together," was all she said. It wasn't an order, not quite, but none of them questioned it. The trucks rumbled them out past the gates, the terrain shifting from gravel to dirt to a stretch of dense woodland where visibility shrank. When they were dropped, the air felt too still. Birdsong, wind, leaves brushing, but beneath it, silence. The kind of silence Nora knew too well. The recruits spread nervously, rifles held too tight, steps crunching, leaves too loud. "Stop!" Nora's voice cut sharp but quiet. They froze. "You're telegraphing your position. Slow your breathing. Step where the ground dips, not where it rises." Her instructions were crisp, practical, whispered like muscle memory. They followed, awkward at first, then steadier. For an hour they moved. Markers triggered distant cracks of simulated fire. Squads scattered in the distance. But Nora's group stayed low, unseen. Bishop finally broke the quiet. "Ma'am, how do you hear this stuff before it happens?" She didn't answer. Instead, she raised a hand, signaling stop. They listened, at first nothing. Then Harris caught it, faint crunching just ahead, too even to be random, not simulation equipment, other recruits, or... Before they could ask, a burst of blank fire rattled from the trees. Harris flinched, stumbling. Nora didn't. She pressed low, eyes sweeping, calculating angles. "Down," she ordered softly. They obeyed instantly. Through the undergrowth, opposing squad markers lit. Recruits playing the role of aggressors, weapons raised, moving too confidently. They expected an easy ambush. Nora motioned silently, 2 fingers, then a sweep. The recruits blinked at her, confused. She adjusted, lowering her hand, whispering instead. Vega left flank, Bishop cover Harris with me. They moved clumsily but followed. The mock firefight that erupted felt real to them, the adrenaline, the sting of blanks, the confusion of movement. Harris nearly broke, panic flashing, but Nora steadied him with a firm hand on his shoulder. "Breathe," she whispered. He obeyed, his shots landed. Within minutes the opposing squad was down, markers blinked out, silence returned. But Nora didn't relax. She stayed crouched, scanning, her eyes tracking tree lines, shadows, the way the wind bent branches. Her body remembered something the recruits didn't know, that silence after a fight often meant something worse was coming. "Move," she ordered, sharper now. They followed. By midday they'd cleared 2 more engagements, Nora guiding them not with lectures but with small corrections, where to place a foot, when to hold breath, when to keep a finger off the trigger. The recruits began to sense it. She wasn't teaching them to shoot. She was teaching them to survive. At one point, Bishop caught her glancing toward a ridgeline. Her face tightened, not fear but recognition. "What is it?" he asked, breathless. "Nothing," her reply came too quickly. But it wasn't nothing. The ridgeline reminded her of another broken building stacked like jagged teeth, smoke bleeding across the skyline, her team's voices cutting one by one. Her chest tightened, but she pushed it down. Not here. Not now. The exercise stretched into evening. The woods grew darker, the light falling in long streaks that painted the ground in shadow. Fatigue set in. Harris stumbled, Bishop cursed under his breath, Vega winced at a twisted ankle. Nora pressed on, unshaken, but inside her silence cracked. Every snapped twig was a rifle bolt. Every gust of wind was a memory of smoke. Every stumble was a voice she could no longer hear. When they reached the final checkpoint, simulated fire erupted again, louder, heavier, meant to overwhelm. The recruits ducked low, panic flashing. Nora didn't move at first. She stood still, eyes narrowing, scanning patterns, angles, the rhythm of fire. Then something broke in her. Her body shifted, not like a trainee, not like a soldier on exercise, but like Black Viper. She flowed between cover with precision. She raised her rifle, not for a blank, but with the intent of someone who had survived ambushes too real to mimic. Her shots cut through the exercise, so controlled that even the instructors watching from afar fell silent. Harris stared, stunned. She's not training, she's remembering. And he was right. Every movement carried echoes of missions erased from history. She moved like the 12 were still with her, like every shot still depended on their survival. The opposing squad's markers blinked out one by one, until the forest was silent again. When it was over, Nora lowered her rifle slowly, her breath steady, though her hands trembled faintly, a tremble no one else saw. Bishop approached cautiously. His voice was different now, low with respect. "Ma'am, that wasn't training, was it?" Nora looked past him, toward the tree line where the light died. Her face gave nothing away. "Everything is training, until it is." The recruits exchanged uneasy glances, understanding more than they wished to. By the time they returned to base, the exercise logged as complete, the instructors whispered among themselves. Colonel Rohr watched from a distance, his jaw tight. He saw it too, the way she moved, the way she carried ghosts into every step. That night the recruits didn't sleep easily. The exercise had been just a drill, but under Nora's shadow, it had felt real, too real. And in her bunk, Nora lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the notebook heavy in her hand. She opened it, tracing the crossed-out names, whispering to each in silence. "I carried you today, I always will." But for the first time in years, another thought came, uninvited. Maybe carrying you isn't enough anymore. Maybe I need to pass you on. She closed the book, her hand lingering on the last uncrossed name, her own. And outside, in the darkness beyond Fort Camden, the wind whispered through the trees like voices returning, faint, almost gone, but not forgotten. Why did the base feel quieter after her squad returned? The other recruits stumbled back from their exercises with dirt-streaked faces and tired shoulders, laughing off mistakes, mocking each other's bruises. But Squad 3 walked differently. No one said it aloud, but everyone noticed. Their movements were sharper, their silence heavier. Something had changed out there. Harris walked with a steadier step. Bishop kept his chin tucked. Vega limped but didn't complain. And Nora, she walked at the front, as though she hadn't carried them, though everyone knew she had. Instructors logged scores. Colonel Rohr watched from the sidelines, his eyes never leaving her. He knew what he had seen. It wasn't training. It wasn't simulation. It was muscle memory from another life. A life she was still living in pieces, whether she admitted it or not. That night the mess hall was loud, but one table stayed unusually quiet. Squad 3 ate together, unspoken unity keeping others at a distance. Recruits whispered about them, curious, uneasy. Bishop chewed slowly, then finally leaned closer. "Ma'am," he whispered, though the title felt odd on his tongue. "Back in the woods, when you moved like that, it wasn't just skill, it was something else." Nora kept her eyes on her tray. "Eat." Harris frowned, "But we want to understand." Her fork stilled. She lifted her gaze, steady and cold. "Understanding costs more than you can afford." The words shut them down, but the silence after them was not rejection. It was warning. When she left the hall, Harris followed at a distance. He found her outside, leaning against the edge of the barracks, staring at the floodlights that lit the perimeter. "Why do you stay quiet?" he asked softly. Nora didn't look at him. "Because words make people believe stories, and stories get people killed." "But you helped us," Harris said. "You didn't have to." Her jaw tightened. For a moment her voice wavered, though only slightly. "You remind me of someone, shaky hands, always afraid he wasn't enough. He didn't live long enough to see he was." Harris didn't know what to say. He wanted to ask her name, the ghost she was speaking of, but he sensed better. Some questions weren't invitations. They were walls. The following morning, training resumed. But now recruits looked to Nora differently. Even those not in her squad glanced her way when their stances faltered, as if her silence might correct them. And sometimes it did. She never spoke loudly, never drew attention, but she would adjust a grip here, murmur a single word there. Lower, wait, breathe. Small fragments that cut deeper than shouted commands. The instructors noticed. Sergeant Harlan pulled Rohr aside at midday, lowering his voice. "Sir, she's teaching them." Rohr's gaze remained fixed on her. "Not teaching, reminding there's a difference." Harlan frowned. "Should we stop her?" Rohr shook his head slowly. "No, let her. You don't muzzle a ghost when it decides to speak." The recruits grew sharper, faster, more disciplined. Not because the course demanded it, but because Nora's presence made them want it. To fail in front of her felt heavier than failing in front of instructors. But with each day, the weight on her grew too. Because every correction she gave, every whisper of instruction brought back faces. Bishop's stance mirrored Holt's. Harris's shaking reminded her of Pike. Vega's limp echoed Raven's last run. Every ghost lived again in their movements, and with it came guilt. One evening, as the sun bled red across the range, Bishop approached her again. This time, his voice carried more steadiness. "Ma'am, I know you don't want to talk, but we need to know. Black Viper, what happened?" Nora froze. Her hand brushed the tattoo absent-mindedly, tracing the number. Bishop hesitated. "You don't have to tell us everything, just something, anything." Her eyes lifted slowly. The recruits nearby had gone quiet, sensing the moment. "What do you think war feels like?" she asked finally. They looked at each other. Harris shrugged. Loud chaos, explosions everywhere. Nora shook her head. Her voice was almost a whisper. No, it feels like waiting. Waiting for hours in shadows, holding your breath until your chest aches. Waiting for the one sound you pray never comes. And when it does, it feels like failure, even if you win. The words hung heavy, stealing the last bit of light from the horizon. She turned away, walking back toward the barracks, her steps slow, deliberate. That night she sat alone again with her notebook. Her fingers lingered on the names. 11 lines, crossed out in black. She whispered each under her breath, as if keeping them alive for one more night. But this time she paused longer on one. Raven, the humming voice. The friend who had always believed silence wasn't the same as loneliness. Nora closed the book with a soft snap, her breath trembling. The next morning, Harlan surprised the recruits with a sudden challenge. Night navigation. No lights, no radios, just compasses, maps, and instinct. They groaned, but Nora's expression didn't change. When the squads were released into the dark woods, panic rippled quickly. Recruits stumbled, whispered too loudly, misread maps. But Squad 3 moved differently. Nora's quiet voice cut the dark. Listen to the ground, feel slope with your feet, smell the air, pine to the west, that's your bearing. They followed, trusting instincts they never knew they had. When Bishop tripped over a root, Nora's hand steadied him before he fell. When Harris froze at rustling ahead, she whispered, "Fox, not a threat. Keep moving." Hours passed, the dark pressed heavy, but they never lost direction. When they emerged back at base before dawn, mud-soaked but first to arrive, instructors looked stunned. Roar hid a smile, Harlan shook his head. "She's reshaping them," he muttered. And she was. But that reshaping came at a cost. Because in every rustle, every shadow, every map corner lit by moonlight, Nora heard echoes of the past. Her chest tightened with every reminder that she wasn't leading these recruits, she was reliving ghosts. Later that day, Roar caught her outside the range. His voice was low, controlled. "You're not here to train, are you?" She didn't answer. "You're here to remember." Her eyes met his steady, and maybe to forget. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Just don't drag them too deep with you. They're not meant to carry your ghosts." Her reply was softer than he expected. "Maybe they should. Someone has to." The colonel felt a chill, because he knew she wasn't wrong. That night in the barracks, recruits whispered again. But this time, their whispers weren't about fear or confusion. They were about responsibility, about carrying more than themselves, about silence and what it hides. Nora lay awake, listening, her lips pressing into a thin line. For the first time in years, she wondered if maybe her ghosts weren't only hers to keep. Maybe they were lessons, hard, painful, necessary. And maybe these recruits who once mocked her were the ones who needed them most. She closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling her under. But even as sleep came, the thought stayed. Sometimes survival isn't enough. Sometimes you have to teach survival to someone else. Why did the night suddenly feel too real for training? Fort Camden's routines ran like clockwork, but sometimes clocks skipped beats. That evening the recruits were jolted awake by alarms, sharp, blaring tones that ripped through barracks walls. Boots hit the floor, gear scrambled, weapons lifted. At first most thought it was another drill, but the tone of the siren was different. Lower, urgent. Harlan's voice roared through the corridors. "All squads to perimeter, now." Recruits spilled out into the night, eyes wide, adrenaline spiking. The floodlights blazed, cutting into darkness, casting long shadows that jittered with every movement. Nora moved with them, but slower, her steps measured. She had heard alarms before, too many. And something in this one, in the way officers moved without shouting, in the silence behind their commands, told her this wasn't simulation. When they reached the southern fence line, the instructors ordered defensive positions. Some recruits fumbled nervously with magazines, unsure if blanks or live rounds had been issued. Nora glanced at the weapon in her hand. The weight told her enough. These weren't blanks. Her stomach tightened. Harris whispered nearby, voice trembling, "Is this real?" Nora didn't answer. She scanned the tree line instead, watching for patterns. Roar arrived moments later, his face hard, his voice sharp. "Unidentified breach near Sector 12. Could be nothing, could be more, stay alert." The words were meant to reassure, but the recruits heard what wasn't said. Could be nothing, could be more. That meant they didn't know. That meant it could be everything. The perimeter stretched quiet, too quiet. The recruits fidgeted, whispering prayers under their breath. Even Bishop kept silent, jaw clenched. Nora crouched low, eyes fixed, body still. Her breathing slowed. It wasn't training anymore, not for her, it was memory. Leaves rustled, a branch snapped. Every recruit froze. Then movement. Figures breaking from the tree line, shadows slipping fast. Not wild animals, not markers, human, armed. The first shot cracked, real. The recruits scattered, some ducking, some firing blindly. Chaos erupted along the fence line, shouts mixing with the whip of gunfire. Nora didn't flinch. She moved low, scanning angles, counting distances, listening to rhythm. 1, 2, 3, too many. Not a full assault, but not a mistake either. A probing test. Harris panicked, his shots going high. Nora slid beside him, grabbing his rifle barrel, pressing it downward. "Breathe," she whispered. "Aim, wait." He obeyed barely. His next shot steadied. Bishop yelled, "They're flanking left." Nora turned instantly, eyes narrowing, tracking the movement before most even registered it. Her body moved before thought, rifle up, controlled bursts. 2 shadows dropped, the rest scattered back. The recruit stared, stunned. Her precision wasn't training, it was survival. The skirmish lasted minutes, but it felt longer. When it ended, the tree line fell still. The floodlights buzzed overhead, illuminating smoke that curled faintly in the air. The instructors barked orders, regaining control, pulling squads back into formation. No one had been lost. A miracle, or maybe not. Roar's eyes found Nora again. She stood apart, rifle lowered, expression unreadable. Later, inside the command post, instructors debated what had happened. Trespassers, smugglers testing the base, or something darker. Roar said little, but his mind was already made. He had seen the way she moved, the way she carried them all in silence. That night, recruits couldn't sleep. They whispered in bunks, replaying the firefight. Harris confessed softly, "If she hadn't been there, I'd be gone." Bishop nodded, for once without sarcasm. Vega said nothing, but the look in her eyes said everything. In the corner, Nora sat awake, notebook in hand. She didn't write, she didn't read. She just held it, the weight of it pressing against her chest. The following morning, the range was silent. Recruits moved slower, weighed down by the reality that training wasn't just training anymore. The mocking tone of the past was gone forever. Harlan tried to keep routine alive, barking commands, correcting stances, but the recruits' eyes drifted to Nora. They had seen her in silence. They had seen her in shadows. Now they had seen her in fire. During a break, Bishop approached her again. His voice was softer than ever before. "Ma'am, yesterday, that wasn't luck. That was something else." She didn't look at him. "Luck kept you alive." He shook his head. "No, you did." Her silence held. Finally, Harris whispered, "Why do you act like saving us doesn't matter?" Her eyes lifted slowly, cold and steady. "Because the ones I didn't save still matter more." The recruits froze. Her words weren't anger, they were truth, heavy, irrefutable. Later that evening, Roar found her again at the range. She was sitting alone, the rifle across her lap, the tattoo exposed. "You saved them," he said. "I delayed them," she replied. "There's a difference." Roar studied her face, the lines etched by years of silence, the burden in her eyes. "You can't keep carrying this alone." Nora's jaw tightened. "I carried 12, I came back with 1. Alone is all I know." Roar's voice softened, almost pleading. Then teach them. Don't let their names end with you, pass them on. She looked at him for a long time, her expression unreadable. Finally, she stood, slinging the rifle over her shoulder. Teaching doesn't bring them back. No, Roar said, but it might keep others from joining them. Her steps were slow as she walked away, but his words followed her. That night when she opened her notebook, her fingers hesitated. She stared at the list. 11 names, one left uncrossed. For the first time, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, that last name wasn't meant to be hers alone. Maybe it was meant to be carried by those still alive. Maybe silence wasn't the answer anymore. The thought scared her, more than the firefight, more than memory, because breaking silence meant facing the weight she had buried for years. She closed the notebook with trembling hands, whispering into the dark. Not yet. But even as she said it, she knew. The time was coming. Why did recruits start training harder when she never said a word? Days after the breach, the energy across Fort Camden had changed. The instructors still barked, drills still ran, but the weight behind each exercise was heavier now. The recruits had seen what silence could do when bullets flew, and they weren't about to laugh at it anymore. Harris steadied his hands with each shot. Bishop kept his voice down, no longer filling empty air with arrogance. Vega moved with precision despite her limp, and all of them, without realizing it, mirrored the way Nora moved. She hadn't set out to teach them, but they were learning anyway. At first, it was small things. They noticed how she walked the perimeter at dawn, her steps soft enough not to crunch gravel. They noticed how she studied the wind before a shot, not rushing, not forcing, just waiting for the moment the air itself aligned. They noticed how she checked her gear, not just her own but others too, tightening straps, fixing loose bolts, treating every rifle like it mattered more than rank. They copied her, and in copying her they began to change. But with every small change, Nora's chest tightened, because the more they became like her, the more she saw the shadows of those she had lost. One afternoon, Sergeant Harlan called for a long-distance shooting drill. Recruits grumbled, wiping sweat, lining up targets across the range. Nora stood at the edge, observing as always. Harris missed his first 2 shots, frustration flickering. Bishop landed close but not center. Vega's bullet struck wide. The instructors barked corrections, their voices sharp, but the recruits' frustration only grew. Then Harris whispered, barely audible, "What would she say?" The others stilled. They didn't need to look. They all knew who he meant. Nora's eyes flicked toward them. She hadn't planned to intervene, but something in Harris's voice, that shaky edge of self-doubt, dragged her forward. She stopped beside him, crouched low. "Show me your hands." He lifted them, trembling slightly. "Too tight," she murmured. She placed her own hand lightly on his, easing the grip. "A rifle isn't a hammer, it breathes with you. Let it." Harris exhaled slowly, lifted again, fired. The shot landed closer. She gave no smile, no praise, just nodded once. "Again." Bishop tried to hide his eagerness. "What about me?" Nora's eyes shifted to him. "Stop leaning forward. You're not charging a wall, you're listening to distance. Listen with your body." He adjusted. His next shot struck true. Even Vega, cautious, asked quietly, "And me?" Nora glanced at her stance. "You're compensating for the limp. Don't. Trust your center, your legs follow." Vega fired, bullseye. The recruits froze, staring at their targets, then at her. Something shifted in the air, heavier than applause. Respect born not of myth but of proof. She stood slowly, her face unreadable. "You think it's about shooting. It's not. It's about breathing with weight you don't want to carry. Every bullet matters. Every miss matters more." Her words settled into them like stones. That evening, whispers spread again. But this time they weren't mocking. They weren't fearful. They were reverent. "She doesn't just shoot," Harris said quietly. "She sees through you." "She doesn't let you pretend," Vega added. She's making us better, Bishop admitted, though saying it cost him pride. They didn't know it, but Nora heard them. From her bunk she listened to every word, and though her face remained still, something inside her shifted. The next morning, Colonel Rohr called her aside, away from the others. "You're teaching them," he said. Nora shook her head. "I'm reminding them." "Of what?" Her voice dropped. "That silence saves more than noise." Rohr studied her. "You know they look at you differently now. They'll follow you, whether you want them to or not." Nora's jaw tightened. "I don't want followers, I want survivors." "Then give them what you never had," he said quietly. "Give them the truth before it buries them." She didn't answer. That night she sat outside again, the notebook open on her lap. 11 names, crossed, the 12th her own, untouched. She stared at it for a long time. Then slowly she pulled a pen from her pocket. For the first time she hesitated, not at the names crossed out, but at the blank space beside her own. She didn't write anything, not yet, but the thought lingered. Maybe that space wasn't meant for her. Maybe it was meant for those she could save. The following week, a storm rolled in. Heavy rain battered the range, turning dirt into mud, targets into blurred silhouettes. Harlan considered canceling drills, but Nora stepped forward. "Don't." The recruits blinked at her. She had never spoken up like that before. "Rain teaches what sunlight hides," she said. "If they can't shoot in this, they can't shoot at all." Harlan hesitated, then nodded. "You heard her. Get in position." The recruits grumbled but obeyed, soaked within minutes. Their rifles slipped, sights fogged. Frustration flared quickly. "Pointless," Bishop muttered. Nora's voice cut sharp. "No, necessary." She walked the line, correcting without hesitation. "Don't wipe the sight, it fogs again. Work through it. Don't fight the rain, time your breathing with it." Harris adjusted, fired. Bullseye through mist. Vega steadied, shot true. Even Bishop, muttering under his breath, landed a clean strike. The storm raged, but something else raged louder inside them, the realization that she was right. That survival wasn't about conditions. It was about control under anything. By the time the storm passed, they were exhausted, drenched but sharper, stronger. And as they trudged back, Bishop said what they all thought. "She's not training us, she's remaking us." But Nora, walking ahead, whispered to herself. "Not remaking, replacing." The word tasted bitter, because she knew what it meant. Every recruit she guided reminded her of the 12 she had lost. She wasn't just training them. She was trying and failing to bring ghosts back. That night she couldn't sleep. She saw Raven's face again, Holt's stance, Pike's trembling hands. They lived in these recruits now, fragments in flesh, and that terrified her more than silence ever had. Because if she cared too much, if she saw too much of them in these new faces, she risked losing them all over again. Still, when dawn came, she rose, first as always. And when Harris stumbled with fatigue, she steadied him. When Bishop snapped in frustration, she silenced him with a glance. When Vega winced at her limp, Nora adjusted her stance without a word. She didn't admit it aloud, but she had already chosen. Her ghosts would not end with her. And for the first time, the silence she carried didn't feel like burial. It felt like legacy. Why did the range feel like a church when she finally spoke to them all? The last day came quietly. No alarms, no sudden drills, just the recruits gathering at the training yard expecting routine, yet something in the air told them it was. Sergeant Harlan gave his usual instructions, but his voice lacked its usual bark. Colonel Rohr stood at the edge, arms folded, eyes on Nora. Even the wind seemed to hush. Nora stepped forward, not because she was called, not because she wanted to, because she knew she had to. The recruits stiffened. Every eye turned to her. For weeks they had watched, whispered, learned in silence. Now she stood at the center, her rifle across her chest, her tattoo bare in the light. "You think this job is about shooting," she said, her voice steady, carrying across the range. It's not. No one moved. It's about what you carry with each bullet. Every shot holds someone's child, someone's future. Every miss holds more. Her words weren't dramatic. They were raw, cut down to the bone. When I was your age, I thought we were heroes, she continued. I thought being a sniper meant being the story's center. But heroes don't spend 16 hours in shadows waiting for one pull. And heroes don't wake up to the names of those they couldn't save. She paused. The silence stretched heavy, but no one dared break it. Black Viper wasn't special because we were the best, she said softly. We were. We were just the ones sent when no one else came back. And one by one I buried them in silence until only I was left. That's not heroism. That's survival. The recruits shifted, shame in their eyes. Harris clenched his hands. Bishop bowed his head. Vega blinked back something unspoken. Nora's gaze moved over them, her face unreadable. You asked how to become like me. The answer is simple. You don't. You become better. You become the version of me that brings everyone home. The version that never leaves 12 names behind. For the first time her voice wavered. You carry each other, not myths, not bravado, each other. The range stayed silent. The recruits hung on every word. She looked down at her rifle, polished to glass. Slowly she laid it on the bench. Next to it she placed a folded black cloth, and atop the cloth her notebook. The recruit's eyes widened. She straightened, her pale eyes sweeping across them one last time. Remember this. The one sitting beside you, the one you think doesn't belong, might be the one who saves your life, so treat them that way. Her words struck deeper than any command. Then she turned, walking away with the same steady step she had carried since the day she arrived. No salute, no ceremony, just silence. The recruits didn't move at first. They stood frozen, processing the weight she had left behind. Then Harris, trembling, stepped forward. He opened the notebook. Inside were pages of notes, detailed corrections on stance, breathing, aim. Each page tailored to a recruit by name: Harris, Bishop, Vega, every one of them. At the bottom of every page, the same phrase. You're better than you believe, prove it. Harris swallowed hard, his throat burned. He passed the notebook to Bishop, who read in silence, his jaw tight, eyes wet. Vega took it next, her hands shaking as she traced the ink. When the instructors approached, none spoke. Even Harlan, who had mocked her once, stayed quiet. Colonel Rohr lifted the rifle from the bench, holding it with reverence. He knew she wouldn't be back. She had come not to train, not to learn, but to leave something behind. That night the recruits gathered without being told. They set the rifle on display at the range, propped on the folded cloth. Beside it, they framed a single phrase. Black Viper. They never shouted, but when they fired it was unforgettable. Years later, when people asked about the myth of the quiet woman who trained at Fort Camden, Sergeant Harlan would show the notebook. He'd run his fingers over the notes, his voice soft. She didn't come here to learn, she came to teach. We just weren't smart enough to see it at the time. Recruits who had once mocked her would whisper her name with respect, not as a legend, not as a ghost, but as the reminder that silence can be heavier than any shout. And Nora herself, she vanished as quietly as she had arrived. No records, no files, only whispers. But somewhere far from Fort Camden, she sat alone again, this time without a rifle in her hands, only the tattoo on her skin and the memories she could never wash away. For the first time she opened her notebook, a new one, blank. She stared at the first page for a long time, then slowly she wrote. Not the names of the dead, not the number 12, but a single word. Begin. She closed the book, her hands trembling but steadying, and in that small act something shifted. For once, silence didn't mean carrying ghosts. It meant choosing what to do with the living. Because survival wasn't the end of her story, passing it on was. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.